Well, hi everybody, I'm back. Finished reading Wonder last week, and I've been waiting for an Amazon order for the next book that I want to read to all of you, and it arrived yesterday. So, are you ready to experience yet another wonderful story with lots of themes and messages immersed throughout the chapters, great characters, some amazing figurative language, interesting setting, interesting time frame, lots of climaxes, and lots of what would I do type questions. The book I'm talking about is by an author by the name of Natalie Babbit, and it's called Tuck Everlasting. Tuck Everlasting. Well, let's talk about what the word everlasting means. Something that's everlasting means it doesn't end. It goes on and on and on. There's a byline or a tagline or a little teaser on the front cover, and I'm going to read that to you, but I'm not going to tell you much more. I'm just going to dive right into the book. It says, "What if you could live forever?" And also the cover gives us a little sense of the setting or time period in history. If you could look closely, you'd notice that there's a little girl holding a frog, and she's wearing a dress, and she's wearing button-up boots. Well, I'm sure most of you at home are not wearing button-up boots, and you're probably not wearing a dress if you're a girl. So I have an inkling that this is set back probably maybe 100 years back in history, maybe even more. I know that the book was written in 1975, so it has withstood the test of time. And it's a wonderful story, and I can't wait to share it with you. So here we go. I'll start with the prologue. Prologues come before the beginning, and they usually give us really good information. Never skip reading the prologue. Here we go. The first week of August hangs at the very top of the summer, the top of the livelong year, like the highest seat of a Ferris wheel when it pauses in its turning. Oh, I forgot how good or how well written this is. The first week of the summer, August, hangs at the top. When you hit the first week of August, you are at the tip top, the pinnacle of the summer months. The weeks that come before are only a climb from the balmy spring, and those that follow a drop to the chill of autumn. But the first week of August is motionless and hot. It is curiously silent too, with blank white dawns and glaring noons, and sunsets smeared with too much color. Often at night there is lightning, but it quivers all alone. There is no thunder, no relieving rain. There are strange and breathless days, the dog days, when people are led to do things they are sure to be sorry for after. Can you picture one of those hot August days where it's so incredibly warm you can't cool off? I think this is what our author is referring to. One day, at that time, not so very long ago, 3 things happened, and at first there appeared to be no connection between them. At dawn, May Tuck Everlasting, set out on her horse for the wood at the edge of the village of Tree Gap. She was going there, as she did once every 10 years, to meet her 2 sons, Miles and Jesse. At noontime, Winnie Foster, whose family owned the Tree Gap wood, lost her patience at last and decided to think about running away. And at sunset, a stranger appeared at the Foster's gate. He was looking for someone, but he didn't say who. No connection, you would agree? But things can come together in strange ways. The wood was at the center, the hub of the wheel. All wheels must have a hub. A Ferris wheel has one, as the sun is the hub of the wheeling calendar. Fixed points they are, and best left undisturbed, for without them, nothing holds together. But sometimes people find this out too late. So a Ferris wheel needs all of its parts to hold together and continue to rotate, kind of like the seasons rotate. There's a lot of symbolism in this book, and we're going to discuss it as I read. Chapter 1. Let's see. We've met May Tuck, Winnie Foster. May Tuck has 2 sons, Miles and Jesse. And then there's a strange man. And it's hot as blazes, and it's the first week of August. The road that led to Tree Gap had been trod out long before by a herd of cows who were, to say the least, relaxed. It wandered along in curvy and easy angles, swayed up and off in a pleasant tangent to the top of a small hill, ambled down again between fringes of beak-hung clover, and then cut sideways across the meadow. Here, its edges blurred. It widened and seemed to pause, suggesting tranquil bovine picnics, slow chewing, and thoughtful contemplation, the infinite. And then it went on again and came at last to the wood. But on reaching the shadows of the first trees, it veered sharply, swung out in a wide arc as if for the first time it had reason to think where it was going, and passed around. Now, if you're a city or suburban kid and you didn't grow up on a farm area like I did, you might have a hard time visualizing what this author is describing. Let me see if I can help. Cows, when they're led from the farm out to pasture, are typically taken in a particular pattern. Cows are heavy animals, and they trod down maybe they've gone through certain crops, or usually it's weeds, and over the years, these almost become farm roads. Well, back at the turn of the century, meaning 1800s to 1900s, road systems developed, at least in the country, where cows had once walked. Cows don't necessarily walk in a straight path, and you'll find that many country roads are winding. And I think this is what the author is describing here. This road wound around through the fields, through the clover, until it got to the wood. Now, by the wood, the author means a group of trees together. Have you ever seen a group of trees just plopped in the middle of a field? That's what I'm picturing. And then when they got to the trees, the cows went around. On the other side of the wood, the sense of easiness dissolved. The road no longer belonged to the cows. It became, instead, and rather abruptly, the property of people. All at once, the sun was uncomfortably hot, the dust oppressive, and the meager grass along its edges somewhat ragged and forlorn. On the left stood the first house, a square and solid cottage, with a touch-me-not appearance, surrounded by grass cut painfully to the quick, and enclosed by a capable iron fence some 4 feet high, which clearly said, "Move on, we don't want you here." So the road went humbly by and made its way past cottages, more and more frequent, but less and less forbidding, into the village. But the village doesn't matter, except for the jailhouse and the gallows. The first house only is important. The first house, the road, and the wood. The author's telling us that once you get beyond that wood, you start to have people living in homes. So the first house is forbidding, meaning it's not welcoming. It has a big iron gate around it, kind of like, don't come near, you're not welcome. And then slowly, as the road winds into the city, it mentions that in the city, and I probably shouldn't call it a city, it's probably a village, there's a jailhouse. But the author doesn't want you to focus on that. The only thing that's important right now is the first house, the one with the forbidding fence, iron fence, the road, and the wood. There was something strange about the wood. If the look of the first house suggested that you'd better pass it by, so did the look of the wood, but for quite a different reason. The house was so proud of itself that you wanted to make a lot of noise as you passed, and maybe even throw a rock or two. But the wood had a sleeping, otherworld appearance that made you want to speak in whispers. This, at least, is what the cows must have thought. Let it keep its peace. We won't disturb it. Whether the people felt that way about the wood or not is difficult to say. There were some, perhaps, who did, but for the most part, the people followed the road around the wood because that was the way it led. There was no road through the wood. And anyway, for the people, there was yet another reason to leave the wood to itself. It belonged to the Fosters, the owners of the Touch-Me-Not cottage. Again, great use of the English language. Touch-me-not. You all know, especially kiddos, since the time you were yay high, your parents were saying, don't touch that, stay away from there, that's dangerous. And the author's trying to tell us that this cottage gives off that feeling, and was therefore private property in spite of the fact that it lay outside the fence and was perfectly accessible. So the people that own this touch-me-not house, surrounded by this iron gate, also owned the wood. Remember, wood is just a formal term for woods. The ownership of land is an odd thing when you come to think of it. How deep, after all, can it go? If a person owns a piece of land, does he own it all the way down, meaning below the ground, in ever narrowing dimensions till it meets all other pieces of the center of the earth? Or does the ownership consist only of a thin crust under which the friendly worms have never heard of trespassing? So does the person own the land that goes all the way down to the earth's crust, to the core? Or do they just own what's basically beneath the grass? Philosophical question. In any case, the wood being on top, except of course for its roots, was owned bud and bough by the Fosters in the Touch-Me-Not cottage. And if they never went there, if they never wandered in among the trees, well, that was their affair. Winnie, the only child of the house, never went there, though she sometimes stood inside the fence, carelessly banging a stick against the iron bars and looking at it. But she had never been curious about it. Nothing ever seems interesting when it belongs to you, only when it doesn't. So her family owns the woods, but she doesn't care because it's hers. But other people might find it interesting. Do you agree with that? I do. And what is interesting anyways about a slim few acres of trees? There will be a dimness shot through with bars of sunlight, a great many squirrels and birds, a deep, damp mattress of leaves on the ground, and all the other things just as familiar, if not so pleasant, things like spiders, thorns, and grubs. Ugh. In the end, however, it was the cows who were responsible for the wood's isolation, and the cows, through some wisdom they were not wise enough to know that they possessed, were very wise indeed. If they had made their road through the wood instead of around it, then the people would have followed the road. The people would have noticed the giant ash tree at the center of the wood. And then in time, they'd have noticed the little spring bubbling up among its roots, in spite of the pebbles piled there to conceal it. And that would have been a disaster so immense that this weary old earth, owned or not to its fiery core, would have trembled on its axis like a beetle on a pin. What a simile. The earth would have trembled on its axis like a little beetle on a pin. So there's a tree at the center of the woods and a little bubbling spring. So what? I grew up in farm country. I remember good friends of mine, their name were the Finkins, 5 girls, and then it was my sister and I, so there were 7 of us all together. They had woods behind their house. We traipsed through that woods all the time, and there was a creek that ran through it. We were in the creek, we played, we made adventures, we built forts. There were lots of little bubbling springs. So what? What's so unique about this bubbling spring? Let's read on. Chapter 2. And so at dawn that day in the first week of August, May Tuck woke up and lay for a while beaming at the cobwebs on the ceiling. At last she said aloud, "The boys will be home tomorrow." May's husband, on his back beside her, did not stir. He was still asleep, and the melancholy creases that folded his daytime face were smoothed and slack. He snored gently, and for a moment the corners of his mouth turned upward in a smile. Chuck almost never smiled, except in sleep. May sat up in bed and looked at him tolerantly. "The boys will be home tomorrow," she said again, and a little more loudly. Tuck twitched, and the smile vanished. He opened his eyes. "Why'd you have to wake me up?" he sighed. "I was having that dream again. You know, the good one, where we're all in heaven and never heard a tree gap." May sat there frowning, a great potato of a woman with round, sensible face and calm brown eyes. "It's no use having that dream. Nothing's gonna change." I love the description, a great potato of a woman with a sensible face and brown eyes. A potato? I'm imagining in my head, I'm picturing her. I'm not imagining someone tall and thin. I'm imagining kind of an older, plump lady with just a normal face and big, bright brown eyes. You tell me that every day, said Tuck, turning away from her into his side. Anyways, I can't help what I dream. Maybe not, said May, but all the same, you should have got used to things by now. Tuck groaned. I'm going back to sleep, he said. Not me, said May. I'm going to take the horse and go down to the wood to meet them. Meet who? The boys, Tuck. Our sons. I'm going to ride down to meet them. Better not do that, said Tuck. I know, said May, but I just can't wait to see them. Anyways, it's 10 years since I went to Tree Gap. No one will remember me. I'll ride in at sunset, just to the wood. I won't go into the village. But even if someone did see me, they won't remember. They never did before. Now did they? Suit yourself then, said Tuck into his pillow. I'm going back to sleep. May Tuck climbed out of the bed and began to dress. 3 petticoats, a rusty brown skirt with one enormous pocket, an old cotton jacket, and a knitted shawl, which she pinned across her bosom with a tarnished metal brooch. The sounds of her dressing were so familiar to Tuck that he could say without opening his eyes, You don't need that shawl in the middle of summer. May ignored this observation, and instead she said, Will you be all right? We won't get back till late tomorrow. Tuck rolled over and made a rueful face at her. What in the world could possibly happen to me? That's so, said May. I keep forgetting. I don't, said Tuck. Have a nice time. And in a moment, he was asleep again. May sat on the edge of the bed and pulled on a pair of short leather boots, so thin and soft with age, it was a wonder they held together. Then she stood and took from the washstand behind the bed a little square object, a music box painted with roses and lilies of the valley. It was the one pretty thing she owned, and she never went anywhere without it. Her fingers strayed to the winding key on its bottom, but glancing at the sleeping Tuck, she shook her head, gave the little box a pat, and dropped it into her pocket. Then, last of all, she pulled down over her ears a blue straw hat with a drooping, exhausted brim. But before she put on that hat, she brushed her gray-brown hair and wound it into a bun on the back of her neck. She did this quickly and skillfully, without a single glance in the mirror. May Tuck didn't need a mirror, though she had one propped up on the washstand. She knew very well what she would see in it. Her reflection had long since ceased to interest her. For May Tuck and her husband, and Miles and Jessie too, had all looked exactly the same for 87 years. How do you look exactly the same for 87 years? What are you thinking? First of all, the writing of this author, her name is Natalie Babbit, and she's written many books. Her style, her use of prose. Prose is another term for poetry. I believe she writes very poetically, is just amazing. And I hope that you enjoy my interpretation, because this is a pretty difficult book to understand for some 5th graders. So I'm going to explain it to you as we go along. But the writer's amazing. And I don't know about you, but I can paint a picture of her in my mind. Her getting dressed with an old brown skirt and a shawl. Do you know what a shawl is? It's a sweater you wrap around your shoulders, pinning the brooch, putting on the blue floppy hat, combing her hair back into a bun. She sounds very much kind of like a grandma figure. 87 years she hasn't changed the way she looks. Tune in tomorrow. Let's find out why. Natalie Babbit's Tuck Everlasting. I know you're going to love this book. Have a great day.